All right, folks, welcome back. We are excited for this next session. This is Beavers in the Southeast, 3 stories of how beavers are impacting water quality. We have Elizabeth Chappelear, teaching assistant at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte. Emma Lacy, student at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, and Rayney Maxwell, student at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte. And Sandra Clinton, who helped facilitate this whole situation here, associate research professor at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte. So without further ado, I will let y'all take it away.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rayney Maxwell. I'm a student at University of North Carolina, Charlotte, and I'm here with my fellow researchers. Yeah, so we're from Charlotte, and we're here today to share with you 3 stories that are separate but also all connected about how beavers are impacting water quality in our region. So first and foremost, before we dive into the research component of this talk, I want to give you guys a little bit of context about beavers in the Southeast. So we are primarily located in the city of Charlotte, which is in North Carolina. So Emma and I both work at pond sites that are in the kind of urban area of Charlotte. So really close to the uptown city center and in some suburban neighborhoods around the city as well. And then Elizabeth works on some sites a little bit further west in the foothills of North Carolina. But this is really important because there's hardly any research about beavers and their impacts on water quality in the southeastern United States. And that's kind of why we're here, because we really care about that and we want more research to be done on that topic. So why do we care? Just to give you guys some background about the area of Charlotte, we are historically a really agricultural area, so that means there's lots of built-up nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen in our soils, as well as other sediments and pollutants as well. They've kind of all accumulated there over the years. Now, obviously, we're a very urban center. Charlotte is one of the fastest growing cities in our country. That's kind of a common theme in cities in the Southeast. So that means lots of increased pollution and runoff as well as impervious surfaces. So that's going to really be detrimental to a lot of our water quality in the Charlotte area. So my specific piece of research that I want to focus on is phosphorus. So total phosphorus components and concentrations in pond systems. So if you don't know, phosphorus is a nutrient that's really essential to all life on Earth. But if it's present in really excessive amounts, it can end up being really damaging and dangerous to ecosystems. Emma will talk about this a little bit later in our talk, but it can lead to really harmful algal blooms that can really kill off freshwater ecosystems. So we want to look for ways that we can kind of prevent this from happening. So just kind of an overview of some of our site locations in the city of Charlotte. Emma and I both worked with the same sites. So we have a set of 6 ponds that we're looking at and collecting data from. We have 3 stormwater ponds and 3 beaver ponds. And as you can see from our pictures of our sites and our site maps, all of our ponds are located in very urban areas, some neighborhood areas, industrial areas, things like that. So really looking at how different pond systems work in those really urban areas. And then our sampling locations, how we went about sampling and collecting our water samples. So these are just 2 examples. We have an example of one of our stormwater ponds and one of our beaver ponds. We really wanted to look at our data and the continuation of data and the flow of data moving through our pond systems. So starting at our inflow locations where water is moving into those pond systems, and then finishing off at our outflow locations where water is moving out of those pond systems and further downstream. And then we also looked at the main basin of our ponds as well, and we picked a few sampling locations in the pond sites of each of our ponds, and then Emma and I both kind of averaged those concentrations and the data we collected from those sites to get one kind of comprehensive view of the makeup and the composition of all of our water in our pond sites. So this figure is just kind of an overview of my component or my piece of the research. It's kind of a complicated figure, so I'm going to walk you guys through exactly what you're seeing here. These are density distribution graphs, so it's kind of just showing you the distribution of my data of total phosphorus concentrations between all of our sampling locations and comparing those concentrations between beaver and stormwater ponds. So starting over here on the left side with those beaver ponds, you can see as the graph moves from blue to green to orange, that's kind of looking at concentrations changing from our inflow to our pond sites and then to our outflow locations as well. And we found that they were pretty similar in all of our beaver ponds through those locations. So there were no statistically significant differences in total phosphorus concentrations as you move through those beaver pond systems. However, if you move over to the stormwater pond side, you'll see that those density distributions are a little bit wider, and it was really interesting. We actually found that between pond and outflow locations of our stormwater ponds, there was a significant difference. So our outflow locations of our stormwater ponds, our phosphorus concentration in our outflow locations was a lot higher than our pond locations, which was kind of interesting. But the really exciting part about all of this is looking at comparisons between beaver ponds and stormwater ponds, because the main goal of our project is looking at which type of pond is most effective at removing nutrients and settling sediment and making sure that we're improving water quality as you move through the pond system. So my research found that on average, in all of our locations, inflow, pond, and outflow, stormwater ponds had, on average, much higher total phosphorus concentrations than beaver ponds. So that's really just suggesting to us that beaver ponds are really complex and they're natural, and they do a much better job of removing or filtering out phosphorus from our waterways. So that's really going to protect our freshwater ecosystems, prevent that phosphorus from moving further downstream and causing harm later down the road. And Emma is going to explain to you guys a little bit about why managing and controlling those phosphorus levels are really important.
Okay, so I'm going to be talking about algal biomass and algae composition. Why do we care about this? Basically, this phytoplankton is heavily controlled by nutrient supplies such as total phosphorus. And usually there's a correlation with, as algae increases, we see nutrient levels, as nutrient increases, we see algae increasing. This algae can be an estimate for eutrophication, and it can also be an estimate for water quality. So right here in the brown dots, it shows the beaver ponds, and blue is stormwater. At the bottom, we look at TP over a year span of time. We see that overall the average TP for beaver ponds was not significantly lower, but definitely lower than stormwater ponds. And we see the same correlation when looking at chlorophyll A, showing beaver ponds also having a lower level. And that shows that they do a better job with mitigating, probably due to their complexity and longer retention times. So this is an MDS, and basically the closer they are, the more correlated they are. And this is showing algal composition, which is the different taxonomy. Again, the brown color is beaver ponds, and the blue is stormwater ponds. And here we can see quite a bit of a difference between the taxonomy. Going into more detail, we look at blue-green algae, desmids, diatoms, and green algae. Overall, the highest composition was in green algae overall. And then looking more in depth, we see that overall there was 6% of blue-green algae in stormwater ponds and 0.7% in beaver ponds. And why we care a lot about the blue-green algae is due to the fact that this blue-green algae can actually cause neurotoxins and can be harmful to people and wildlife around. It also can negatively affect water quality, causing algal blooms. We hypothesize that the stormwater ponds do this due to usually they're in even more urban areas than beaver ponds, and they're very stagnant and shallow, and usually also have fast retention times, so it doesn't have a lot of time to nutrient cycle. This is work done by our post-lab mate, Jamil. It's one of the pond sites we also did MC5. It's a beaver pond. And he was able to get the retention times before the beavers moved in and then after, which was really interesting to see. And so what we saw is that the beaver ponds actually had a 30-hour retention time, and the stormwater ponds had a 3-hour, or not, sorry. And then the before the beavers came, it was a 3-hour retention time. So that is a vast difference, which, for example, for the TSS levels, there's a 53% more level of total suspended solids. If you don't know what that is, it's sediment, which means that the beaver ponds had a longer retention time to be able to deposit this TSS sediment. That's just of that. All right. Now Elizabeth is going to teach you a little bit about BDAs.
All right. So my lab mates, Emma here and Rayney, have done a great job at explaining the benefits of beaver ponds in mitigating excess nutrients. And a lot of times beavers aren't exactly welcomed, and BDAs are a tool that could potentially be used for these situations. Here I have an example of the project that I'm working on. We installed a series of BDAs, so man-made beaver dams. And can y'all hear me okay? Okay. So we installed those in March of 2023, and it was a group of about 50 people. Not everyone made it into this photo, but it was a communal effort from community citizens and scientists. So we have people across different universities, and then we also have the Foothills Conservancy and Catawba Riverkeeper that really played major roles in making this possible. So my study specifically focuses on hyperureic activity as a function around BDAs versus riffles. And so these natural riffles are examples of what the stream would be like without the presence of the BDAs. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to actually sample before the BDAs were installed, so this allowed me to have a comparison. These piezometers were installed in March 2024, so about a year after the BDAs were installed. Okay. So for those of you who aren't familiar with a piezometer is like a monitor well, and it's installed to a depth where the screen is able to sample at specific depths within the subsurface. My piezometers specifically were installed to depths of 30 to 50 centimeters, just because that's what we estimated the best range would be for hyperureic activity based on literature. So the importance of the surface water and groundwater data collection. So surface water is commonly associated with aerobic activity. You have higher levels of oxygen, you have a lower specific conductivity, and generally higher temperatures in the summer. So groundwater is going to have anaerobic activity because of the low oxygen, high specific conductivity, and then lower temperatures. And for those of you who aren't familiar with specific conductivity, that's basically how many electrolytes are in the water because of that interaction with the ground and the rocks. Oh, I'm sorry. I also wanted to mention that hyperureic zones are kind of like where the groundwater and surface water mixes. And so that's when you get aerobic, anaerobic, and hybrid biogeochemical processes. The importance of that is that you're going to have more nutrient cycling, and it just really increases the capacity for the stream to improve water quality overall for the watershed. This is an example of the riffle. You can see that there's a little bit of So the main difference here is that you have higher oxygen and you have higher temperatures in the surface water, and then you have lower oxygen, lower temperature in the surface or in the groundwater. But specific conductivity at our riffle sites were really pretty level throughout, and I think that that's pretty consistent with the fact that there wasn't much downwelling or upwelling present here. What you can see is that when you get more downwelling from the BDAs being installed, you get a lot more variety in the specific conductivity levels, the oxygen levels, and the temperature. Well, actually, the temperature was pretty consistent. It was just a slight variation there, but not too apparent. Okay, so you can see moving from upstream to downstream, you have a really high conductivity around like 120 in the deeper piezometer, so like the first one. And then you come to the third piezometer, and you have that high conductivity again of greater than 100. And that's really interesting because in between those two areas, you have a conductivity that's more in that middle range. And so I would predict that that shows that there is a bit of hyporheic activity or increased hyporheic activity that's happening there compared to the riffle that doesn't have as much variability. So in conclusion, I would say that beaver dam analogs are a great tool for, either having some of that functionality of a beaver pond where you aren't able to actually have beavers and you get more control over it. But honestly, beavers do it better. As my colleagues have shown, they're really great at providing ecosystem services such as nutrient cycling through the watershed. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
I do hear other speaker.
Okay.
I forgot what your name is of the stormwater work. I work at stormwater in King County, Washington, and so I was wondering if your study made you think about any ways you could improve a stormwater pond to mimic beaver ponds, and anecdotally if you saw beavers using your stormwater ponds in your area, because we see that a lot in my area.
So we have not seen any beaver activity in our stormwater pond locations as of yet. I don't know about the future, but as for improving stormwater ponds, I think I haven't done a lot of thinking about that, but I think maybe just creating them to mimic the structure of a beaver pond. So a lot of our beaver pond sites have, multiple pond systems that the water is moving through. You have dams that are kind of dividing up different areas of our pond systems. So that water really has to it takes the water a lot of time to kind of move through that pond system. So anything you could install or implement in stormwater ponds that would kind of mimic that and slow the water down to give it more time to, again, do things like nutrient cycling, sediment, like depositing sediment in the bottom of the stormwater pond, things like that. Anything you could do to kind of mimic how the water flows through the beaver pond, I think could potentially improve stormwater ponds. But it would be really interesting to do a study to kind of compare stormwater ponds that looked a little bit more like beaver ponds and see how the data changes with that kind of idea. Yeah.
Did your pond have liners? The stormwater ponds?
They have like concrete basins in the bottom, then liners. Yes.
Okay.
I guess to add on to that, different studies I've read, like usually adding a fountain in the middle of the stormwater pond really helps aerate the water and really helps with like preventing those algal blooms and like helps mix out that nutrients. So that's a way for now to help prevent that, but hopefully we can someone can come up with some future plan to fix the stormwater ponds.
I would say too, and maybe this is separate from your study specifically, but when I was working on the Urban Beaver project, which I know yours stems from, there were two sites. One is
stormwater pond and one a beaver pond, and they were side by side in the same neighborhood. So like the beavers never actually took over the stormwater pond, but they were working adjacently, basically. We have another question in the back.
How do you guys think the beaver pond would affect the pH of the water?
Probably would go down.
We don't specifically look at that currently as one of our parameters, but definitely look into it.
We do have pH, we have some pH meter issues, but some data are not 100% reliable. But generally from the inflow, pH is higher, basic, 7 to 8. But then, especially when it's leaking the ponds, because of all the organic matter, we get really low pH. And then when it comes back out to the stream, as an outflow, once it makes it in the stream water, it goes back up. But within that pond, it's definitely
Yes.
Thanks for a wonderful presentation. I have a question for the first speaker. Sorry, I don't figured it. There was a really nice figure that you presented on the total phosphorus. And I guess, I think, forgive me if I missed it during the presentation, but you were saying that the inflow versus the outflow on the beaver ponds there was no significant differences, but it was clear from that figure too that the overall phosphorus between the beaver ponds and the stormwater systems were very different, where the ponds were lower. I guess could you repeat perhaps if you covered it or elaborate upon like why you think the overall phosphorus in the beaver ponds was lower than the stormwater areas?
Yeah. So we've kind of been brainstorming and thinking ahead about those inflow sites because it is interesting that our total phosphorus concentrations for inflow at the stormwater ponds is a little bit higher. So in the coming months, we want to look at differences between base flow and storm flow and see whether that might have had some sort of impact on that data. And maybe we didn't have enough time to do it before this conference, but really pulling apart and kind of getting into the nitty-gritty of that and seeing whether storm flow events could have some sort of impact on the phosphorus concentrations in our stormwater ponds. So unfortunately don't have a clear answer for you right now, but that's also something that we were really curious about and interested in looking into a little bit further. So
We're literally just thinking about that.
Is there kind of equal representation in kind of the spectrum of urbanness?
I would say so. We tried to pick pond sites that were
Equally similar.
So a lot of neighborhood and industrial activity. We wanted to try to match up our ponds as best as possible to create a fair survey and analysis of the project. So
I'm working on trying to get a percentage of impervious coverage around, just to try and see if there's a huge difference, because that can heavily impact our results.